So I joined Edwards Life Sciences in their technical development program. So for that, you would like do different rotations across the company, like R&D, quality, manufacturing, marketing, etc. Um, and I think for me, probably the pivotal one was when I was in the advanced technology group. For my rotation, I was kind of given a relatively broad edict of make something for transcatheter mitral repair. And so with that, I kind of like worked on a couple different things. Some were old ideas people had that they just didn't have time to work on. Some were ideas of my own. And actually through that process, trying all different designs and like animal hearts and stuff like that, landed on the concept that would become the Pascal system. So that was actually like a really cool experience, kind of like I was just like the little engineer in the corner working on my own, occasionally hitting up different people for advice, help, and actually got to start what would become, I think, is currently the largest share of revenue of their mitral and tricuspid business unit.
Mm.
And so, yeah, like basically got that through its acute preclinical study, looked pretty good. Then I continued rotating through, I did marketing and quality after that. Um, and then when basically I finished the program, it becomes like, okay, they call it roll out. Where do you roll out into? And I ended up rolling out onto that program that I had started.
Mhm.
And so that was like a really unique and cool opportunity to like not only get to like invent something, but almost like invent my job.
Mm.
And so then I rolled out onto that program, and then just slowly but surely, like the program grew there. And yeah,
Yeah. Okay. And then so what happens after Edwards Life Science after you spend this time, inventing new things, contributing,
yeah,
positively to the bottom line for the company?
yeah.
What's your next role, or where do you transition to after that?
Yeah, so after that program was kind of getting to the point where it was in chronic preclinical studies, it wasn't just me anymore. There were like, I don't know, maybe like 8 people on the team. I was kind of contacted for potentially a role at this startup called CardiAQ, where they were developing the world's first transcatheter mitral valve replacement system. And the role would be to lead the development of the like transfemoral transeptal delivery system. So that's going through the femoral vein up across the heart and replacing a mitral valve, which no one had done before. And it was kind of funny. Initially, I was like, no, 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 I'm good. I have this thing here. Like, I want to see it through. But I was like, but it'd be great to meet you guys. Right. So I went to the office, met everyone, and just totally like fell in love with it. Just the people there were brilliant, like genuinely like good people and just so dedicated to what they were doing, that it really resonated with me. And I also really liked the whole idea of no one in the world had ever done this before. While what I was doing at Edwards was certainly relevant, but mitral repair had already existed. Transcatheter mitral repair already existed. And so I kind of just almost like impulsively just made the jump. So I think the timeline was literally like Friday. I'm like, no, I'm good, but I'll go visit. And I visited like on Monday, Tuesday, and quickly that visit became an interview. I think I got the offer on Thursday and I put in my 2 weeks that following Friday. So like literally like end to end, this whole process was about a week.
Wow.
Um, yeah, a little crazy impulsive on my part, but yeah, it was a good opportunity. I had to check it out. And yeah, that was actually where I met Dr. Quadri, Dr. Arshad Quadri, and Brent Ratz, who are the co-founders of CardiAQ. And yeah, so I led the development of the transfemoral delivery system there. We did our first in human, and then we're actually acquired by Edwards. So it's kind of the whole full circle thing of like leaving Edwards for the startup, then Edwards acquires the startup. And then I stayed at Edwards for a couple more years, further developing that technology. So I worked on like leading next generation delivery system development, implant development, kind of like different things here and there. And I think probably what's most relevant is like, that ended up becoming the Evoke system. And so I led the early R&D development for the delivery system for Evoke,
Mhm.
which is the world's first transcatheter, ironically, tricuspid valve replacement system. Because basically while we were there at Edwards, we kind of acknowledged that the greatest clinical need seemed to be more on the tricuspid replacement side. So we actually pivoted towards that after the acquisition, and found immense success and just massive clinical enrollment and unmet need. And so that's now commercial both in the United States and Europe. And then during that time, I was actually getting my MBA part-time at UCLA. So basically Monday through Friday, I'm at Edwards, Saturday, Sunday, I'm at UCLA. That was definitely a pretty challenging balance to maintain. But yeah, so I graduated with my MBA. Evoke at the time was in its pivotal study. And so I moved over to kind of like the business development or exploration discovery group under the mitral and tricuspid business unit. So I'd basically just travel around, meet different startups, lead diligence. Should we invest? Should we acquire? Should we watch? And I think kind of from meeting all those different entrepreneurs and seeing these startups and all this passion, it really kind of reignited that like spirit of cardiac or CardiAQ in me. And I was like, yeah, it'd be really great to do another startup. But then it kind of became like, okay, but what do I think is going to be the next major catalyst? And I think in general, a lot of people say for cardiovascular devices, it's heart failure. But for me, it was like, but what part of heart failure, right? Like that's a pretty like broad domain.
Right.
And I think for me, what was really important was during my time in all those mitral and tricuspid development programs, I was supporting cases around the world, right? So helping clinicians implant this device in patients, in like Germany, Italy, United States, Canada. And it's very near and dear to my heart. So I actually paid a lot of attention to what happened to the patients afterwards, in the days, weeks, months, years following. And there was definitely a clear trend of like we'd fix all these valvular diseases, but the patients would still end up getting congested or volume overloaded, have trouble breathing and need to come back to the hospital to try to promote diuresis to get this volume out. And so for me, that really struck a chord, right? Where I was like, almost emotional. Like I thought I fixed them. I thought we made the thing that would heal them, but there's still this problem persisting.
Mm.
And so for me, when I was kind of wondering like what's the next thing, for me it really became that, right? Like what are ways that we can try to improve the way we manage volumes or diuresis in these patients? Around the same time, I was catching up with Dr. Quadri and Brent. I would catch up with them from time to time, after all the time we worked together. And I was telling him I was thinking this. I was like, like I don't know the idea yet, but I really want to do something in heart failure. And they were, starting this incubator, Incubate MedTech, and had just gotten a bunch of funding from selling one of their other programs to a major multinational strategic. And they were like, come board, like come be a part of this incubator. We'll effectively give you your seed round. We'll be a part of this, and we can all work together again. It kind of felt like getting the band back together, and so, I kind of put in my 2 weeks and joined Incubate. And really in the early days, it was pretty much just me and my garage, me and my dog. So I had like, a couple different things for prototyping in my garage. I cleared everything out, had all these little lab benches. Um, and I actually had a couple clinicians even come to my garage, like folks that I'd known for a long time and just like, hey, like, here's what I'm working on. Here's what I'm thinking. And I think in the early days, probably had like somewhere between 6 and 8 different concepts. And yeah, through talking to clinicians and, kind of stress testing all of them, whether that's on the bench, that clinical feedback, or even preclinical studies, really started to land on the concept that would become relief. And then I think once we were really landing on this concept and getting that feedback from clinicians that were like, yeah, if you can make this work, it's a big deal. That's when, I graduated from the garage and kind of moved into more legitimate R&D
Yes.
space.
Yes. Okay. So I have some questions about that. Uh, in your monitoring of these patients from your previous role at Edwards with this device and project that you worked on for ventricular diseases, and you noticed that they were having this congestive uh, fluid buildup.
Yeah.
What was the actual cause of that based on what you built, and where was it falling short that was causing this, I guess, like unintended response from the body in terms of this fluid buildup that was taking place?
Yeah, that's a great question. In many ways, kind of is like the $1 billion question.
Okay.
Because I think with heart failure, there's a lot of like chicken or the egg type problems. And I would say like if you talk to different clinicians, you may get different answers. So I would say, at least from my perspective.
Hmm.
Yeah. So when you look at these patients, one of the clear things that starts happening is kind of a negative feedback loop between the kidneys and the heart.
Yeah.
So basically, the heart's trying to do the best job it can, but let's just say for some reason it's not quite pumping as much as it should, right? And that can be valvular related or ejection fraction related, what have you. So now the kidneys are seeing a little bit less flow coming through them. And so that makes the kidneys think, oh, like the body doesn't have enough fluid, not enough volume to pump, so I should hold more fluid. So it does that. It reduces diuresis. So now you have an increase in fluid. But now when that fluid hits the heart can't handle it, right? The heart's like, I can't pump that much volume. This is too much load on me. So it starts pumping less, which then makes the kidney goes, oh man, I need to pull that lever harder. I need to hold more fluid. And so this is kind of considered cardiorenal syndrome. And so a lot of times with heart failure, a huge portion of the issue is that interplay between the heart and the kidneys. And so for me, I was like, we've done so much on the heart side addressing all of this, but it seems like we're missing that other half of the equation. And so that's kind of what led us to start really focusing on the kidneys.
Okay, interesting. And then so the fluid that's building up, is this, I assume because it's, dealing with the kidneys, that it's not necessarily blood that's building up necessarily, or is it the blood that's actually building up as opposed to some other bodily fluid that
Yeah.
actually, comes out through diuresis?
Yeah, so fluid is kind of like a catch-all term.
Right.
So like your body has like straight up water,
Hmm.
interstitial fluid, blood, and I'm sure, many, 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 many others. And so it's your kidney's job is to basically make sure you don't have too much fluid in your body.
Hmm.
And so for I would say most aspects of heart failure, people are typically thinking of what's like vascular volume, so your blood.
Okay.
Though I certainly wouldn't discount the impact of interstitial fluid or lymphatic fluid that can also cause compression on the organs.
Mm.
But for the most part, people tend to think of it through the lens of vascular volume.
Okay, excellent. And um, since you made that observation, and now you're in the incubator with Incubate, and you're looking for this next opportunity, um, what's the opportunity you identified and ultimately settled on to now build with Relief Cardiovascular?
Yeah, so I think for me, reflecting on the clinical experience, looking at clinical literature and talking to clinicians, it became increasingly compelling that it was the venous pressures on the kidneys that was driving this problem. So you can look at all these different papers and they all kind of show the same thing, that like your kidney function is more driven by that venous pressure, sometimes called the afterload on the kidneys, than your arterial pressure or even your cardiac output. And so then it became a question of like, okay, what are ways that we can try to modulate those renal vein pressures, like lower them when needed to improve that diuresis. Um, and so I think early on, it became two main mechanisms that came to mind. It was like, okay, can we create a pump that, helps pull blood through the kidneys to lower that pressure? And then the alternative was, is there a way that we can create a system that basically controls where blood flow is coming from to make it so that the heart pumps more from the kidneys? So we were looking at both approaches, and basically those are called pushers and pullers.
Okay.
So we were looking at both, like pushing more blood through the kidneys with a pump, or pulling more blood by controlling the natural flow in your body. We were pursuing both, but I felt the longer we worked on it and the more we talked to clinicians, the more it became clear that, at least to us, that this puller approach was kind of going to give us more bang for the buck. And so we ended up focusing on that puller mechanism. And so it became all about like, okay, how can we try to create a permanently implantable transcatheter system that can monitor the renal vein pressures and lower those renal vein pressures? And when you look in the clinical literature today for what's being done in acute heart failure, one of the kind of class of systems that's starting to become increasingly popular are temporary catheters that use this polar effect, right? So that, some are using balloons, some are using kind of stent-like designs. There's a lot of different ways people are doing it, but they all work on this principle of basically like, if I want more blood to be pumped from the kidneys, I can just reduce the amount of flow coming from somewhere else,
Hmm.
right? And so that's kind of where the traffic cop metaphor comes in, where it's basically like, if you have too much traffic on this side of the street, just tell this side of the street to slow down a little bit and let more come through there, right? And so that's kind of the core mechanism of how our system works, is it's being a traffic cop between the femoral veins, your legs, and your renal veins, your kidneys. And so it's basically like when pressures get high, that means there's too much traffic in the kidneys. Okay, well, temporarily reduce how much blood's coming from your kidneys, or sorry, from your legs, so that then more flow can be coming from your kidneys.
And how long does that temporary redirection last typically?
Yeah, so with the temporary catheters, it's pretty much anywhere between 6 hours to 12 hours. But that's in patients that are very, very, very congested. Like they're like in the hospital just struggling. And so I think from our clinical experience, we'll learn more about like what's the maintenance of these patients.
Mhm.
Because I think like a good parallel to draw is diuretic drugs like water pills. That's honestly how we treat this stuff today. Is we just push as many diuretics as we can. But the problem is twofold. So like one is like diuretics are actually toxic to the kidneys,
Yeah.
and so you're kind of like whipping the kidneys into submission, and then as you're doing that, you're harming the kidneys. But then your kidneys also build up a tolerance to diuretics, so you're just increasing the diuretics, whipping it harder and harder and harder. And so you're kind of killing the kidneys by trying to make them work harder. And so when these patients get hospitalized with severe congestion, you're basically just pushing as many diuretics as you can without totally destroying the kidneys. And so there's actually a really funny like story that came out about a cardiologist and a nephrologist literally getting into a fist fight in the hospital.
No way.
Yeah, like literally, you can look it up. Like they got into a fist fight. I can't remember which one of them. It was either the cardiologist or nephrologist was arrested for assault, um, and it was all over managing the patient's medications, because literally it's a battle between heart and kidney. But what's great with relief, right, is that we're actually improving blood flow through the kidneys. So it presents a unique opportunity where we may be able to enhance diuresis without, kind of beating up the kidneys in the process.
Very interesting. And I guess sticking with the metaphor of kind of like the traffic cop, redirecting traffic, et cetera. In the real world, I guess, when, you have an intersection where um, there's an individual there regulating the traffic, um, it creates flow on one side, but then causes severe blockages or
Yeah.
inconveniences on the other side. So I'm curious, um, from your perspective, what are the risk or the trade-offs associated with that approach? And I mean, obviously, everything has trade-offs, so nothing is really, perfect or 100% solution.
Yeah.
But I was just curious in the sense of like, if I'm redirecting blood flow from, the veins in my legs to my kidneys for 6 hours, um, do you anticipate or is there any expected side effect from that
Yeah.
as a result of that blood flow redirection?
Yeah, so I mean, intuitively, you would expect your legs to start feeling kind of puffy, right? Because you're building up traffic
Mhm.
in there. And so I would say, at least from our preclinical studies, that actually has not been observed.
Interesting.
So we'll observe our preclinical subjects while the device is actively doing its traffic cop, and we don't see any change in behavior, any sign of discomfort, nothing. And then with the temporary catheters, similarly, there have not been reports of adverse events or discomfort or any unusual sensation. So I would say, based on the data we have today, the price one pays for this benefit appears to be remarkably low.
Hmm.
But certainly, as we get in the clinic, as with all things, like you'll kind of learn a little bit more about how to most optimally use the device and how to most optimally select the patients where the benefits outweigh the risk.
Okay, absolutely. I appreciate that information. Are you able to share a little bit more, I guess, about the design or the philosophy behind the design of your device and
Yeah,
how it works and things of that sort? I don't know how much you could share, but if
yeah,
anything, yeah.
yeah. No, I'm happy to be pretty open.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically, the way the system works is you come in through the subclavian or auxiliary vein, kind of same as a pacemaker, and then you advance your catheter down to below the renal veins. and then you expand like basically a little nitinol or self-expanding frame, kind of like a stent, and that has an integrated pressure sensor attached to it. And then it has a lead extending from that that connects to a pacemaker like controller, and you just implant that on the skin. And if the patient already has like a pacemaker or a defibrillator, you can just come in from the other side. Not necessarily a big deal. And basically, because that pressure sensor is located right at the renal veins, it's able to monitor that renal vein pressure. And then basically, if it detects that pressure gets high, then our stent is able to narrow the vessel that provides a venous return from the legs. And so then basically you're able to, control that renal vein pressure as needed. And so our system is able to autonomously collect that renal vein pressure along with a couple other parameters like ECG, respiration, posture, etc. It autonomously collects that data, uploads it to the cloud every night, and then basically you can use it to remotely monitor your patient, kind of like some of those existing devices like CardioMEMS or Endotronics. But what's great is our system's not only providing that pressure, but it's also providing all that context, heart rate, posture, and is autonomous, right? So there's no like patient needing to remember to do anything. And then basically if the pressures get too high, so those renal vein pressures are trending up, right, showing you that the patient's starting to get congested, that whole feedback loop with the heart and the kidneys might start happening. Then the system knows, hey, this patient needs some therapy. So then again, it can activate that traffic cop function, reduce the femoral venous return. So that then when the heart's pumping, it'll be pumping more blood from the kidneys and lowering those pressures. And then it can do that for a preset amount of time. So you can tell it do this for 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, twice a day, once a day, whatever. And then once it's completed that prescribed cycle, the device reopens the vessel and allows normal physiologic flow.
How do you envision your device
Yeah.
being prescribed with patients in conjunction with pharmaceutical medications?
Yeah, our goal is really to be complementary.
Okay.
And so there's kind of two ways that it does that. So one is the pure data aspect, right? So if you see patients' data is trending in certain ways, you can elect to modify medications based on that, right? So you can be like maybe more or less of an ACE inhibitor or something. And then it also aims to enhance pharmacological efficacy because basically, as those renal vein pressures go up, the amount of blood flow going through your kidneys and pharmaceutical uptake drops. And so our goal is not to eliminate diuretics. Our goal is to enhance diuretic efficiency. So like, for example, instead of pushing 80 milligrams of furosemide a day, maybe your patient now only needs 20, 40, something less because that diuretic efficiency is now improved, which has really, really positive implications for long-term outcomes because of all those nephrotoxic aspects of the medication. So like, and this has been shown with other devices as well, like some of the mitral repair systems. Like if you can improve overall health and management of the pharmacologics, you can really, really enhance the outcomes of these patients. So it's not a battle. It's more about, being able to cohesively enhance all aspects of care.
I'm curious then, at what stage of heart failure do you feel your device would be most appropriate to treat a heart disease patient or congestive heart failure?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's a really great question, but I would say the answer to that question, of course, will evolve
Right.
as we go into the clinic. So, like, typically with these novel devices, you tend to go in the patients that kind of stand to benefit the most, right? So, that typically veers towards the sicker patients.
Mhm.
But I would say the main kind of initial population of those patients that are on high doses of diuretics but still just getting congested, feel terrible, and are still occasionally going to the hospital to try to get treatment. So for those patients, they're really not being served by existing medications. This device could really, represent a change in the outcome, right? Like by improving their diuretic efficiency and helping their management, they should feel better and help them stay out of the hospital. But obviously, like as we continue to gain experience and learn more, much like many other devices, that threshold of how resistant to diuretics do you need to be, our goal will be to try to inch that down to try to serve a greater and greater patient population. because it really is like if we can try to keep patients out of this cardiorenal loop, then it's more than just those later stage highly diuretic resistant patients that stand to benefit.
Okay, excellent. And in your conversations with, I assume, cardiologists, um, and other physicians, I guess I won't just assume only cardiologists, but
Yeah.
other physicians and medical professionals. What's some of the feedback that you're getting from them about the early stages of the device? Why are they excited about what you're building, and what do they envision to be the implications of your device when it gets commercialized and gets into the clinic?
Yeah, I mean, I think the responses have been really positive, and I think overall a lot of people almost get this feeling of like pseudo science fiction with it, because kind of like I alluded to earlier, currently the only devices are ones where the patient has to like lay on a pillow, it collects some data on their blood pressure, and then uploads it to the cloud. The clinician logs into the cloud. They look at the data. They look at their meds. Do I increase that, decrease that? So like for the entire care continuum, it's a crazy amount of work, right? And not to mention the compliance, right? Where it's like now the clinician needs to call the patient and be like, hey, take more of this, less of that. And then potentially call them back later and being like, okay, now stop doing that. So it's a ton of work, right? And it's all because the pressure they were measuring, they didn't like. It was too high, it was too low, usually too high. While with relief, patient doesn't have that daily ritual anymore. Just collects that data and uploads it. It contextualizes it. And then I think the part that kind of blows people's mind the most is like, if that number is too high, you can literally press a button and the device will do its thing to lower that pressure directly. And I mean, even when we're doing our preclinical studies, the staff there, they even kind of just, their minds are blown, where we'll literally be telling like our electrical lead, Joe Passman, will be like, Joe, hey, can you actually lower that pressure like 2 more millimeters of mercury? And he'll literally press a button on a tablet and we'll just watch that hemodynamic change 2 millimeters of mercury.
Hmm.
And so just the idea of like you can press a button on a digital device to change someone's renal vein pressure. Oftentimes when I explain it, just I almost feel like I must be making this up. There's no way that's possible, but that is actually what we
Yeah, that's
created.
amazing. That is amazing, and it does sound very much out of science fiction,
Yeah, right.
but you're building it in reality, which is amazing. Um, I guess another thing I'm curious about, kind of on that note, um, is the data collection, as you mentioned, contextualizing, these readings that you're getting off of your device in a world where now, I mean, everything is set to be AI enabled or driven by AI. Do you think about the value of the data you're collecting within that context, and do you have any plans on integrating more artificial intelligence or leveraging your data set to larger LLMs that can, um, uh, in, excuse me, larger LLMs and other artificial intelligence companies that can benefit from the data you're collecting? Because it seems very novel, the type of data you're collecting, especially within context.
Yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head on kind of the longer term vision. I mean, I feel like there's so much hype over AI right now that I almost try to restrain myself from bringing it up because then I feel like I'm just like the 80th entrepreneur and just to shout about AI and everything. But no, you're totally correct. So like, let's just say every day our device is collecting about 4 instances of data. And so that's about, let's just make the math easy. That's 1,000 data points a year per patient. And so very quickly, we're talking about tens of thousands, millions of data points on patients with heart failure, their pressures, and their pressures relative to activity, heart rate, breathing, time of day. And then being able to tie that then into clinical outcomes so we can annotate that data. This is when they went to the hospital. This is when they reported a reduction in quality of life metrics. Um, I mean, I would say like our data set that we'll be working on might be the most comprehensive that's ever existed, or ever will, or when it exists, will be the most comprehensive that's ever existed. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, you can already see with companies that have much more limited data sets, the remarkable amount of critical attributes they're able to extrapolate off that. I mean, there's one company that basically it listens to your voice and then it tries to predict how likely you are to have a congestive heart failure event just from listening to your voice.
Mm.
And so for me, I'm like, that's incredible, but just think of what we'll be able to do with this even larger data set. And so, yeah, I mean, definitely in hopefully near future, the goal is to try to create predictive indexes to basically be able to say like, hey, on a risk scale, this patient's on an 8 out of 10. Either that needs to drive this therapy more proactively, or it enables us to more proactively manage heart failure. Because, like, in general, the problem with healthcare is it's just so reactive, right? Like, we kind of wait until something horrible happens.
Hmm.
And the more we can try to make it proactive, the more we can really enhance outcomes and do it in an incredibly economic way as well. Just historically, the challenge has been data fatigue. And a lot of people think AI is going to be the thing that saves us all from data fatigue. But the problem is there's still, what do you do with that data at the end? So even if it tells you like, hey, this patient is feeling bad, we got to do something, like, there's still the fatigue of what do I do with it, right? And so again, with the current paradigm of pressure monitors, what drugs do I change, and then how long should I change them, how much should I change them by? But again, with relief, our goal is to really simplify not only the data fatigue, but the, I don't know, I guess, decision fatigue,
Hmm.
and just be like, I wish that pressure were 4 millimeters of mercury lower, and then you can press a button, and now the system will lower that
Yeah.
for a couple hours and make the patient feel better.
Yeah, that's incredible. And then I guess if I heard correctly, it's collecting data at an interval,
Mhm.
essentially. I forget what the interval is. It's every couple of hours, every 6 hours or so.
Yeah, it's programmable right now.
Okay,
So I would say, like in our preclinical studies, I think we're doing it about every 4 hours.
every 4 hours. Okay.
But again, it's programmable, so you can kind of tell it to record as much or as little as you want.
Great. So, can you tell me a little bit about the team you're building? Because I mean, obviously you're the founder, but would love to know about the other individuals who have now joined you on this
Yeah.
mission to build this device to help patients with congestive heart failure.
Yeah. So the team now is 7, including myself. And then basically the way we have it structured is we have like the electrical systems team, which is led by Joe Passman, and the mechanical systems team, which is led by Juliet Schwartz. And I mean, I would say the majority of the company are people that I've known for years now. And they're crazy enough to take my call and do this. And pretty much all of them, have past experience at medical device companies. So I think, our company's kind of a mixture of like Edwards Life Sciences and Boston Scientific backgrounds, which nicely complements kind of the whole like mechanical vascular stent implant and then the, electrical systems, right? And so, yeah, I mean, we kind of grew, I would I would say, at a reasonable pace. I feel like we probably on average have hired someone almost every quarter. And so it's very much been a thoughtful, like, we only hire when the need is strong. And I'm a big believer of what well, not just me, but many others call like talent density. Like, I would rather have this team of 7 just absolute kick-ass people than a team of like 12 like pretty dang good people. Because like when teams get larger, the modes and routes of communication exponentially increase and coordination becomes really dang hard. And then you also risk having increasingly siloed knowledge, where it's basically like, I'm the guy that does this screw. I made this screw perfect. While I'm a big believer of broad responsibility is like so proportionate to how engaged and excited people are, where it's like, I don't just make the screw on the delivery system, I make the delivery system, right? Like, and so, we're a small team, but we're all a team of people that are experienced. We've done these kind of devices before, especially these like first in human, first of its kind. And so we all just really gel together well, which is just so important. Because heck, a lot of times we all kind of hang out with each other more than we do with our spouses, right? And we're sometimes here until like 11 or midnight. Pretty important that we like enjoy working with each other. But then at the same time, it's important that we're all really dang good at what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And how was the experience of recruiting these individuals? I know you said you've known them for years, but you still obviously have to get buy-in for the vision. And so, how was that experience or process for you actually going out and recruiting these individuals to build this super team here at
Yeah.
Relief Cardiovascular?
Yeah. It's kind of funny because it's a balance of trying to, garner the interest on the vision, but at the same time, like there is some level of confidentiality. So I think at least usually like before the person signed, like I'd be a little bit cagey early on where I'd be like, yeah, it's for heart failure, it's controlling renal vein pressures. But usually like right before they signed, I would be like, okay, now I'm going to be real with you. Here's the design. I want to make sure, like, because like the last thing you want is for someone to join and be like, I hate this design, right? Or I hate this concept. And you're like, oops, sorry. And so, yeah, usually like right before they sign, I'd be like, this is what it is. You in? And, thankfully, 7 out of 7 were in. I would say it definitely requires a leap of faith. And it's probably no coincidence that a lot of these people I've known for a long time. Like I think, on the two leads, I've known Juliet for about 7 years, and I've known Joe for probably 10 or 11 years. Um, you kind of have to be a little bit crazy to join a startup as early as we were back then, where, it's like, what's your runway? And you're like, the end of the year. And you're like, okay, I'm going to leave my stable job for that. So you really do have to believe in the person, believe in the vision and all that. So yeah, I certainly don't think it's a coincidence that I've known a lot of these people for so long, because you got to be crazy to do this. But I mean, at the same time, I take that leap of faith of theirs obviously like very seriously and dearly. And I do kind of like to tell people at work, I'm like, this isn't going to be our last startup together. And I really do genuinely like believe in that.
Absolutely. Um, what are you all working on now in terms of a roadmap? I don't know how much you can share about that, but
Yeah.
generally speaking, you have this super team, extremely dense in terms of talent. Um, what direction are you headed in, and what do you all need to be able to execute on that vision, let's say over the next 12 months?
Yeah. So we've now frozen the design. And so we're really focused on getting into the clinic now. So, we've started or completed a lot of our longest lead time testing. And so now it's really just about building the clinical lot of systems, getting it through the lot release testing, and then starting to treat patients. So 2025 is going to be all about clinical execution. It'll be all about finding the right patients, enrolling, treating, following up. Again, we're going to be getting these daily data uploads from all patients. And so that whole like, millions of data points, that's going to be our reality in not too long. And so it'll be a lot more on that side. So it's probably like the first half of the year will be, you know, the last of the engineering to release the clinical lot. And then the second half of the year will be all about getting that clinical feedback and clinical experience.
Excellent. And then I guess we touched on it a little bit, but would love to hear you completely articulate the vision for Relief Cardiovascular on a long-term horizon. Um, when we look up 5 years from now and we circle back on this conversation and see where Relief Cardiovascular is, then what do you see for Relief Cardiovascular? 5 years into the future, and what's your grand vision ultimately for this company?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there, but I'll try my best to kind of be succinct.
No worries. Take your time.
Yeah. So I think for relief, when I think about where see us in about 5 years, in 5 years, hopefully we'll have treated, say, 100 patients. We'll have that millions of data. We'll start to have the algorithms running to predict heart failure events. We'll have a mechanism to be able to act upon that data, right, to lower that pressure and get patients back on track before they start to kind of spiral. And so my hope is that not only will we be able to predict heart failure, but we'll be able to preempt it. And then be able to really make patients with heart failure, this is probably too extreme, but almost like forget, right?
Mm,
Because again, with the way our device is built, where patients don't have a daily interaction with it, my hope is they just kind of forget they have a device and they just live their life, right? And for clinicians, right, instead of the current paradigm of logging in, looking at the data, should you adjust this medication, that one, they also just kind of forget, right? The system has the data it needs and the hardware necessary to be able to act autonomously as well. And so my true hope is that we're able to build this into a system through engineering and clinical experience where all parties involved can kind of just set it and forget it. And this whole thing about like having your biannual or quarterly heart failure hospitalization with congestion, it just kind of becomes a thing of the past.
So you're headed into the clinic in 2025. A lot to do there, a lot to execute upon next year. But I'm curious, after you execute as intended in 2025 within the clinic, what's next for Relief Cardiovascular, and what is it you need at that point to be able to execute on the next stages of
Yeah.
the clinic?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, so like you said, 2025 is all about that kind of first in human series, which will probably be mostly primarily outside the United States. And so then 2026, basically after we've done those cases, gotten some follow up and kind of validate we like this design, this is where we should go, or any kind of last second little tweaks we want to do. I think the natural evolution is to start an early feasibility study in the United States. And so for that, it'd be activating a couple sites, probably, West Coast, East Coast, and then treating patients under that IDE approval. It would probably be, 20, 30 patients, and then start to get more serious, regimented follow-up and outcomes. And I think an important part also is demonstrating and validating how it fits into clinical practice here in the United States, which is, the largest market for medical devices. And so that's kind of what our next round of fundraising will be primarily about is the resources necessary to be able to initiate and execute on that early feasibility study.
Excellent. Excellent. Um, well, Alex, it was great to speak with you. I'm super excited about what you're building at Relief Cardiovascular. And I believe it's one of the more compelling innovations in the cardiovascular space that I'm aware of. And I'm just thrilled that I've had the chance to speak with you and really excited to see what you continue to do moving forward.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been fun. Appreciate it.